Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a region of forgotten corners, isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying winter horror stories ever told. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Appalachian wilderness, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened during the winter I thought would finally fix my life. I was 29, broke, and running from mistakes I didn't know how to name. When I got a temporary job inspecting abandoned utility lines deep in the Appalachian Mountains, I didn't hesitate. The pay was decent, the isolation promised quiet, and the snow, thick, blinding, endless, felt like something that could bury the past. The locals tried to warn me. At the gas station near the last paved road, an old man asked where I was headed. When I told him the line ran past mile marker 17, his smile vanished. He just said, "Don't follow anything that whistles back." I laughed then. I shouldn't have. By the time I parked my truck, the forest had swallowed all sound except the wind cutting through bare trees. No birds, no animals. Just white ground stretching forever, and a single black power line vanishing into the woods. I followed it, not knowing something was already following me. At first, the hike felt routine. I followed the power line the way I'd been trained to, counting poles, checking for visible breaks, marking coordinates in my notebook. My boots crunched loudly against the frozen snow, the sound echoing too clearly in the dead forest. Every few minutes, I stopped and listened, expecting to hear wind in the branches or an animal moving nearby. But there was nothing. About 20 minutes in, I noticed the silence had weight to it, like the woods were holding their breath. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, almost playful. A thin, uneven whistling sound drifting through the trees. I froze. It didn't come from any direction I could pin down. It wasn't wind. It had pauses, rises, and falls, like someone trying to remember a tune. I told myself it was air moving along the power line, metal reacting to the cold. Then I stopped walking. The whistling stopped too. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing with sick certainty that whatever was making that sound was listening to me. The same way I was listening to it. I didn't move for a long time after that. My fingers tightened around the flashlight until they hurt, and I told myself the fear was just my imagination catching up with the quiet. Eventually, I forced my legs forward. Turning back felt worse than continuing, like admitting I'd already lost control. As I walked, the forest began to change in small, wrong ways. The trees leaned closer to the power line, their branches bent inward as if they'd grown around it deliberately. The snow beneath my boots showed marks that weren't mine. Long, shallow grooves, half filled by drifting powder. I tried to convince myself they were animal tracks, but they ran too straight, too intentional. Then the whistling returned. This time it was closer, clearer, and unmistakably deliberate. 3 short notes, a pause, then 3 more. I stopped again, breath fogging the air, and whispered, "Hello?" before I could stop myself. From somewhere deeper in the trees, something answered. Not with words, but by repeating my exact breathing pattern back to me. Shaky inhale and all. Panic took over then, sharp and ugly. I spun in a slow circle, sweeping the flashlight across the trees, half expecting to see a face staring back at me. The beam caught nothing but bark, snow, and shadow. But the feeling of being watched only intensified. I started walking faster, almost jogging, boots slipping as the ground sloped downward. That's when I noticed the power line ahead was sagging unnaturally low, drooping between two poles like something heavy had been hanging from it. The metal hummed faintly, vibrating in the cold. The whistling came again, right behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I looked, whatever was following me would finally be allowed to close the distance. My chest burned as I forced myself forward, repeating my own name in my head like a prayer. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The whistling wasn't coming from behind anymore. It was coming from ahead. Right where the power line disappeared into the trees, I slowed to a stop, every muscle locked tight. The forest ahead looked the same as it always had: trees, snow, darkness. But the air felt thicker, charged, like it was waiting for something to happen. The power line dipped lower and lower until I had to duck beneath it, the cold metal buzzing softly inches above my head. That's when I smelled it. Not rot, not blood. Something older. Damp, sour, and metallic. Like wet fur left too long in a closed space. My stomach turned as the scent grew stronger with every step forward. I lifted the flashlight higher, scanning the ground, the poles, the branches. I saw movement then. Something tall shifted between the trees, just beyond the reach of the light. It didn't step forward. It leaned, as if bending its body around a trunk. The whistling stopped entirely. In that sudden silence, I understood the truth too late. The sound hadn't been calling to me. It had been guiding me. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. My heels slipped, crunching loudly against ice, and the forest reacted instantly. Branches creaked, snow fell from above. Something shifted its weight nearby, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. The whistling returned, but now it was wrong. It came in broken bursts, rushed and uneven, like someone mocking panic. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the inspection, the job, or the truck anymore. All that mattered was distance. The power line became a lifeline, a black thread cutting through the white chaos. I followed it blindly, lungs burning, legs screaming. Behind me, the whistling kept pace, never closer, never farther, perfectly matched to my speed. Then my radio crackled to life. Static gave way to my own voice, distorted and stretched, whispering my name through the speaker. "Ethan, you missed a pole." I didn't stop running. The forest thinned suddenly, opening into a narrow clearing I didn't remember passing on the way in. My legs gave out, and I stumbled forward, catching myself on one of the power poles. The wood was coated in ice, slick and biting cold. But it felt solid, real, in a way nothing else had for the last hour. I risked a glance behind me. Nothing moved between the trees. No silhouette, no sound. Even the whistling had stopped. For a moment, hope flared. Maybe it had given up. Maybe whatever lived out there couldn't leave the cover of the woods. I leaned against the pole, gasping, my breath coming out in ragged clouds. That's when I noticed the markings carved into the wood. Deep grooves spiraled around the pole, cutting through old warning labels and faded numbers. They weren't random. They repeated in the same pattern over and over, like tally marks made by something patient. At the bottom, half buried in snow, were scraps of fabric frozen solid. Bright orange, the same color as my safety vest. I wasn't the first one to stop here. The radio crackled again, and this time it didn't try to sound like me. A low hum filled the speaker, layered with faint, overlapping whistles, all slightly out of sync. The sound vibrated through my chest, making my teeth ache. I ripped the radio off my belt and threw it into the snow, but the noise didn't stop. It was coming from the power line itself. The cable above me trembled violently, sagging lower as if something massive was climbing along it from pole to pole. Snow shook loose from the branches, and I dropped to my knees, covering my head as the whistling rose into a shrill, unbearable pitch. Through the blur of tears and frost, I saw it at last. Not fully, just enough. Long limbs bent the wrong way around the pole. A head that tilted too far, stretching as it listened. No eyes I could see, only a mouth opening and closing, shaping the whistle like it was learning how to breathe. Then it leaned closer, and the lights went out. When the lights died, the world didn't go dark all at once. They faded in sections, like something was moving along the line, turning the power off as it passed. The forest sank into a thick, suffocating black, broken only by the weak glow of my flashlight flickering in my hand. I lay flat in the snow, afraid that standing would make me visible again. The whistling softened, losing its rhythm, stretching into slow, experimental breaths. It was no longer hunting. It was studying. Snow crunched nearby, deliberate and careful. Whatever it was had come down from the line. I kept my eyes shut, counting my breaths, praying it couldn't see the way humans did. A shadow passed over me, blotting out the faint starlight. Then came the smell again, wet, metallic, ancient. Something leaned close enough that the cold around my face changed, displaced by its presence. I felt pressure near my ear and the whistling returned, perfectly matched to my breathing, as if it had finally learned how. Then it stopped, and I realized it had lost interest. I don't remember getting back to my truck. I remember sitting inside it hours later, engine running, heater blasting, hands locked around the steering wheel so tightly my fingers were numb. Dawn crept over the mountains, pale and indifferent, revealing the forest exactly as it had always been. Too normal. Search crews found no damage to the line, no footprints, no carvings on the poles. They told me hypothermia can cause auditory hallucinations, memory gaps, panic episodes. I let them believe that. I quit the job the same day. Sometimes, late at night, when winter storms roll through my town, I hear it again. Not outside, inside my walls. A soft, familiar whistling that rises and falls with my breathing. I never answer it. Because I know now what the old man meant. The whistling doesn't call you out into the woods. It listens. And once it learns you, it never forgets. My name is Laura Whitmore, and this happened the winter I went looking for quiet and found something that knew my name. I'd grown up in cities, noise, crowds, light everywhere. So when my marriage ended, the idea of spending a winter alone near the Appalachian backcountry felt like a reset. I rented a small lakeside cabin meant for summer tourists, cheap because no one stayed once the water froze solid. The lake was massive, smooth as glass under the snow, stretching farther than I could see. Locals warned me not to walk out on it, not even when it looked safe. One woman at the grocery store grabbed my arm and said, "If you hear someone calling from under the ice, don't answer. It's not drowning." I laughed it off. The first week passed quietly, too quietly. No animals, no cracking ice, just stillness so complete it made my ears ring. On the 8th night, the snow fell thick and heavy. I heard it, a voice, soft, muffled, calling my name from somewhere beneath the frozen lake. At first, I thought it was the wind slipping through gaps in the cabin walls. Old buildings make noises, especially in the cold. I wrapped myself tighter in a blanket and tried to ignore it. Then the voice spoke again. "Laura." Clearer this time. Female. Familiar in a way I couldn't place. It drifted up through the floorboards, through layers of ice and water, sounding distorted, like someone speaking through a long tunnel. I stood at the window, breath fogging the glass, staring out at the frozen lake. Moonlight reflected off the snow, turning the surface pale and unreal. There were no cracks, no holes, nothing that suggested anyone or anything could be beneath it. The voice came again, louder now, urgent. "Please, it's cold." My chest tightened. Every instinct told me this was wrong, that no human voice should come from that place. And yet, something deeper stirred, an almost painful need to help, to listen, to step closer. I reached for my coat. That's when I noticed the footprints. They led from the cabin door, straight onto the ice. And they were already there before I moved. I opened the cabin door and was hit by air so cold it stole my breath. The night was unnaturally bright, moonlight reflecting off the snow like a frozen ocean. I stood there, staring at the footprints, my mind struggling to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. They weren't random. Each step was evenly spaced, careful, as if whoever made them knew exactly where the ice would hold. They went far, farther than anyone sane would walk alone at night, and then stopped, right in the middle of the lake. The voice drifted up again, closer now, clearer. "I can hear you breathing." That's when fear finally rooted me in place. I hadn't made a sound. I hadn't even stepped outside yet. Still, something beneath the ice knew I was there. I should have shut the door. Instead, I followed the footprints a few steps, my boots squeaking softly. With every move I made, the ice responded with a deep, hollow groan. The voice changed then. It stopped pleading and started smiling. I froze, my foot hovering inches above the ice. The sound beneath me wasn't cracking. It was shifting, like something repositioning itself under the surface. The lake felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. "I know you're scared," the voice said gently. I was too. It sounded exactly like me. Same cadence, same slight hitch in the breath I'd had since childhood. I staggered back, heart slamming so hard it hurt and nearly fell. The ice answered with a long, vibrating moan that traveled outward in every direction. Shapes moved below the surface, long, pale blurs sliding just beneath the ice, too smooth, too coordinated. They circled the spot where the footprints ended, tracing slow, patient loops. The voice whispered again, right beneath my feet. "There's room down here." That was enough. I turned and ran, boots slipping, arms windmilling, not caring if the ice broke as long as I got away. Behind me, something slammed hard against the underside of the lake. The ice didn't crack, it laughed. I made it back to the cabin and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I locked it, then dragged the small kitchen table across the entrance, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every nerve in my body felt exposed, like the cold had gotten inside me and refused to leave. The voice didn't stop. It seeped through the walls, through the floor, through the silence between my thoughts. Sometimes it cried softly. Sometimes it spoke calmly, explaining things. How the lake had been there long before the cabins, how winter made it easier to hear, how lonely it was beneath all that ice. I covered my ears, but the sound didn't fade. Then it started telling me things I'd never said out loud. Private fears, small, shameful memories. The exact words my ex-husband used the night he left. Details no stranger could possibly know. The voice wasn't guessing. It was remembering. A loud crack echoed outside, sharp and sudden. The cabin shuddered slightly, as if something heavy had pressed up against the ice near the shore. Then the voice whispered, pleased. You're closer than you think. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, watching the door, the windows, the cracks in the wood, waiting for something, anything, to break through. Just before dawn, the voice changed again. It weakened. Its words stretched, slowed, like they were traveling a longer distance. The pressure beneath the cabin eased, and the ice stopped groaning. For the first time since it began, there was space between the sounds. Curiosity crept in where terror had been. I hated myself for it. I crept to the window and wiped away the frost with my sleeve. Outside, the lake looked untouched. Smooth. Perfect. No cracks, no signs of impact, except the footprints. New ones had appeared overnight. They circled the cabin slowly, step by careful step, pressed deep into the snow. They didn't come from the lake. They led back to it. And as the first weak sunlight crept over the ice, the voice spoke one last time before fading into silence. "Tonight," it promised, "you come closer." I told myself I would leave that morning. I even packed my bag, hands moving fast and clumsy, stuffing clothes wherever they fit. But every time I reached for the door, my chest tightened, like something invisible was pressing me back. The lake was quiet now, too quiet. I stepped outside anyway, the cold biting harder than before. The footprints were still there, sharp and fresh, as if the snow had preserved them deliberately. I followed them despite myself, each step filled with dread and an unbearable pull I couldn't explain. Halfway to the lake's center, the voice returned, no longer beneath me, but all around. "You hear us better now?" it said. I stopped. The ice beneath my feet was cloudy here, thick with trapped bubbles. Shapes drifted below the surface, slow and graceful, like bodies suspended in deep water. There were too many to count. Faces pressed up from beneath the ice, blurred, distorted, mouths opening and closing in silent unison. They weren't trapped. They were waiting. And somehow, impossibly, I knew every single one of them had once stood exactly where I was standing now. The ice cracked beneath me, sharp and loud, snapping me out of the trance. I screamed and stumbled backward, falling hard onto my hands. The sound echoed across the lake, and the faces below shifted instantly, turning upward toward me. The voice wasn't singular anymore. It layered itself, dozens of tones overlapping, all speaking at once. "Stay. Sink. Be warm." The ice pulsed, flexing like a living thing. Hairline fractures raced outward from where I'd fallen, spiderwebbing beneath the snow. Freezing water seeped up around my gloves, numbing my fingers instantly. I crawled, sobbing, dragging myself toward shore as the ice groaned in protest. Hands, too pale, too smooth, pressed up from below, stretching the surface thin, but never breaking it. Just before I reached solid ground, the voices fell silent. The pressure vanished. The cracks sealed themselves. Behind me, the lake lay smooth once more, innocent and still. But I knew the truth. It hadn't failed. It had let me go. Back in the cabin, I locked every door, pushed tables and chairs against them, and refused to sleep. My hands shook for hours, and every creak of the old wood made me jump. The sun climbed higher, and the lake glimmered peacefully outside as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, I swore I wouldn't leave the cabin again. I didn't care about food, heat, or sanity. I stayed huddled near the wood stove, listening. At first, nothing. Just the occasional wind through the trees. Then a faint, faraway echo drifted over the ice. It wasn't a voice this time. It was a melody. Broken, distant, hauntingly human. I knew the sound. It was me singing as a child, alone in my bedroom, long-forgotten memories trapped in snow and ice. The lake remembered. The voices remembered. And when I pressed my ear to the floorboards, the faint, whistling response of hundreds of trapped echoes called back. I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I left the cabin the next morning, abandoning everything I came with. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The voices didn't follow me beyond the tree line, but I could feel their weight, lingering in my chest as shaping my breaths. Back in the city, I tried to forget. I avoided lakes, rivers, anything that held still water. But winter came again, and the memory returned. I would hear it sometimes in dreams, soft singing, whispers from beneath ice, calling my name. I never answered, I never will. The lake is still there, frozen every year, smooth, pristine, innocent in the daylight. But I know what waits beneath. Patience, observation, memory. And I know that when it decides, it will call again. I keep my windows closed now, and my doors locked. I do not walk on frozen lakes, but the memory of the voices beneath the ice follows me wherever I go, reminding me some winters are not meant to be survived, only remembered. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this happened the winter I thought I could escape my past in the Appalachian backcountry. I had rented a small cabin deep in the woods, far from roads, far from people, where cell service was non-existent. The plan was simple: write my book in isolation and forget the city's noise. The locals called the area Whispering Pines, a stretch of forest so dense the sun barely touched the snow-covered ground. They warned me the woods were old and listened, but I brushed it off as small-town superstition. The first few nights were peaceful. Snow drifting silently, the occasional owl hoot, the crack of branches under deer hooves. But on the fourth night, the calm broke. I awoke to soft whispers echoing around the cabin, like hundreds of voices speaking just below the threshold of hearing. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I heard my name, muttered slowly, intentionally, from somewhere inside the walls. I wasn't alone. I got out of bed, my heart hammering, and grabbed a flashlight. The whispers stopped the moment I moved, leaving a heavy silence in their place. I swept the beam across the room. Empty. Furniture undisturbed. No footprints, no drafts. Nothing to suggest someone had entered. I stepped into the hallway. The whispers returned, softer now, almost playful, circling my head like invisible tongues. They weren't coming from any one direction. They were everywhere, inside and outside at once. I could swear one voice was laughing. I tried to leave, but the front door was frozen shut. Heavy ice had fused it to the frame overnight, and every attempt to pull it open made the whispers grow louder, overlapping into a deafening chorus of unintelligible sounds. Panic clawed at me. I ran to the window, throwing back the curtains. Outside, the forest was quiet, moonlight catching frost on every branch. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Yet the feeling of being watched pressed down, like the pines themselves had eyes. Then a hand, pale, frozen, and impossibly thin, tapped lightly on the glass. I stumbled back from the window, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The whispers had grown louder, closer, curling through the room like smoke. I couldn't tell if they were outside, inside, or somehow inside me. Each word sounded familiar, though I couldn't understand a single one. Names, half-phrases, memories I hadn't thought of in years. They were there, twisted and mocking. I tried to calm myself, telling my mind it was exhaustion, imagination, the isolation getting to me. But then the floorboards groaned under weight that shouldn't have been there. Something invisible passed behind me, brushing my shoulder. My skin crawled, goosebumps erupting across my arms and neck. I swung the flashlight, catching nothing but shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. Then came a whisper so cold it burned my ear. "Daniel, come outside." I froze. My name wasn't just called, it was demanded. And the tone carried a hunger, a patient promise of pain and curiosity. I realized, with icy certainty, that leaving was no longer an option. I backed toward the far corner, desperate for something solid to hold onto. The whispers multiplied, layering over one another, overlapping like hundreds of voices trapped in a tunnel. Each syllable carried a fragment of memory, childhood secrets, regrets, private fears, things no one else should know. I reached the fireplace and grabbed a poker, my only defense, though I had no idea what it could do. The air grew colder, frost forming along the window edges, my breath visible in thick clouds. Then the whispers merged into a single voice, soft but commanding. "Outside, join us." I shook my head violently, gripping the poker, but the cabin seemed to stretch. The hallway grew longer, shadows deeper, walls bending. Every exit felt farther away than before. Then I saw them outside the window, dozens of pale figures, blending with the pines, perfectly still. Their faces featureless, yet unmistakably watching. They didn't move toward me. They didn't need to. I understood. I was already trapped. The night stretched on like a living thing. Every sound, the wind rattling the eaves, the faint creak of the cabin floor, felt amplified, deliberate waiting. I stayed huddled near the fireplace, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles turned white. The whispers never stopped. They circled, rose, fell, and sometimes paused long enough to make me think they had gone, only to return more insistent than before. At one point, the flashlight slipped from my hands, clattering across the floor. Darkness swallowed the room. I froze, terrified of what would move first. That's when I felt it. A cold brush across my calf, fleeting but real. I jumped to my feet, but no one was there. Only the whispers, now murmuring in patterns that sounded like laughter. The window rattled violently. Something heavy leaned against it. The figures in the forest shifted, moving in ways that defied physics, appearing closer, then fading into the pines. I realized I wasn't observing them. They were observing me, and I was not winning. I tried to reason with myself. It's the wind. It's animals. It's exhaustion. But my instinct screamed otherwise. The whispers grew louder, sharper, almost chanting, repeating my name in endless loops. Each utterance made the cabin feel smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning toward me. Then came a knock, soft at first, then insistent, on the back door. Slow, deliberate, measured. I dared not approach. The poker shook in my hands as the knocking continued, harmonizing with the whispers, forming a rhythm that pierced my mind. I peeked through a window. The forest was alive with movement. Shadows stretched between the pines, figures gliding silently across snow, never leaving footprints, yet somehow circling the cabin endlessly. And then I noticed the snow at my feet, tiny depressions forming a circle around the cabin, like it had been drawn there by something unseen. My blood ran cold. They weren't outside. They were surrounding me. I couldn't stay still any longer. Every second spent frozen gave the whispers strength, feeding off my fear. I grabbed the poker and forced myself toward the front door, heart hammering so loud I thought the forest would hear it. The snow outside glimmered in the pale moonlight, deceptively calm. I stepped outside. The moment my boot touched the snow, the whispers surged, surrounding me, pressing into my mind. Shapes darted between the pines, tall, pale, faceless, moving with unnatural speed, circling me, cutting off any path to escape. Each step I took seemed to echo in the silent woods, only to be swallowed instantly, leaving me disoriented. Then I saw it. A figure unlike the others. Closer, taller, its presence commanding the whispers. It glided toward me silently, yet every instinct screamed it wasn't bound by the same rules of space. My stomach dropped, and the wind stilled, as if the forest itself held its breath. I realized the cabin hadn't drawn them here. I had. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my balance, eyes locked on the figure. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, rising and falling like waves, chanting my name over and over. I swung the poker, and it passed through empty air, though the cold pressed against my arm, freezing flesh and bone alike. The faceless figure stopped a few feet away. I could feel its awareness, a silent intelligence, as if it had been waiting for me to act, to panic. Then, without warning, the snow around me rippled, forming depressions in a swirling, circular pattern. The forest seemed alive, bending slightly toward the center of the circle, compressing space. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my feet felt rooted. Then, the figure tilted its head in a gesture I almost interpreted as curiosity. The whispers fell silent, every single voice gone, leaving a hollow, suffocating quiet that pressed down on my chest. I understood then. I had survived, but only because it wanted me to know it was watching. I didn't sleep that night, nor the night after. I stayed near the cabin, every sound amplified, every shadow suspicious. The faceless figure never left, but neither did it advance. It observed, patient, deliberate lecturer, like a teacher waiting for a student to understand a lesson they didn't want to learn. During the day, the forest seemed normal again, quiet and still. I thought about leaving, but each time I tried to pack or drive away, I found the path blocked, not by trees, not by snow, but by an invisible pressure that forced me to stop. Even the road felt manipulated, bending and stretching in impossible ways. At night, the whispers returned. But now they spoke in sentences I could understand, recounting things I'd done wrong, secrets I'd buried, fears I'd hidden even from myself. Every word made the cabin feel smaller, the forest closer, the figure larger. I realized the whispering pines weren't just trees. They weren't just voices. They were a mirror, showing me myself, stripped bare and judged. On the 7th night, I accepted it. I walked outside willingly, hands trembling, chest tight with fear and awe. The faceless figure waited, as did the other shadowy forms, circling silently among the pines. The whispers rose into a unified chant, soft and melodic, beckoning me forward. I reached the center of the clearing. The snow beneath my boots was hollow, echoing each step unnaturally. The figure leaned slightly, and I felt a strange warmth spread through me. A warmth that wasn't comfort, but understanding. The forest exhaled. The voices faded. The figure receded, melting into the pines, leaving me alone with the snow, the moonlight, and the unbearable quiet. I left the cabin the next day, abandoning my belongings, my manuscript, and any hope of returning. Whispering pines never let you forget, never let you leave unchanged. To this day, whenever I hear the wind through trees, I hear faint whispers calling my name. I never answer. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and this happened the winter I thought I could conquer the Appalachian wilderness on my own. I had hiked these mountains many times before, but this winter was different. Snow had fallen early and thick, covering trails in a uniform white that erased all landmarks. My plan was simple: hike a loop I had memorized, camp at a small ridge, and return by nightfall. I was confident, even arrogant. The forest was silent, oppressive in its stillness. Each step I took sank into the deep snow, muffling all sound except the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. I should have turned back when I first noticed it. An unbroken trail of footprints alongside mine. They weren't mine. They were fresh, large, and oddly shaped. Each one pressed into the snow with deliberate weight, following me, but never quite close enough to see clearly. By dusk, the footprints had multiplied, circling around me with perfect precision. I was being watched. I knew it before I saw the shadows moving between the trees. I tried to ignore the footprints, telling myself it was another hiker, lost or reckless. But as night fell, the forest's shadows grew longer and darker, stretching unnaturally, and the footprints stayed. They mirrored every turn I made, sometimes splitting into smaller tracks, crisscrossing around me as if I were trapped in a cage. I set up my tent in a small clearing, heart pounding. But even there, the footprints formed a perfect circle around me. I could hear the wind, or maybe the movement of something else, whistling through the trees, creating soft, unintelligible murmurs. Every gust sounded like whispered laughter. Then I saw it. A shadow crouched low against a tree, impossible to make out fully, its head cocked as if studying me. When I shone my flashlight, it vanished instantly, leaving only a faint imprint in the snow. I realized I wasn't following the trail. The trail was following me. I didn't sleep that night. Every snap of a branch, every shift of snow made me jump. The shadows seemed to move with me, always just at the edge of vision. I thought I heard footsteps around the tent, soft and careful, never fully stepping on the snow, just close enough to make me certain I wasn't alone. By morning, the air was bitterly cold, and the forest looked deceptively calm. I packed quickly, determined to leave, but the footprints outside the tent had multiplied overnight. They led nowhere and everywhere at once, looping in impossible paths, circling trees, crisscrossing the main trail. I forced myself to follow my original route, but the forest seemed different. Landmarks I knew well appeared in the wrong place. Every turn I took led me back toward the footprints. I could feel eyes watching, though I never saw the observer. And then I heard it. A low growl coming from directly above me, as though something crouched in the tree branches themselves, waiting for me to step off the trail. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself to move slowly and stay on the trail. Every time I looked behind, the footprints were still there, perfectly aligned with mine, yet impossible. They didn't match the width or shape of my own boots. Sometimes they split into pairs, then vanished entirely, only to reappear farther down the trail. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion set in. My fingers and toes were numb and the cold felt alive, biting into bone. I finally heard movement beside me, not in the trees, but on the snow itself. Something large and deliberate was following, stepping just outside the footprints, keeping pace without making a sound. I tried to call out, but my voice died in the frozen air. The shadow moved with me, always just a step behind, mocking and patient. And then, out of nowhere, a sound erupted, a loud crack of ice from a frozen creek ahead. The shadow froze, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I realized the trail wasn't just following me. It was leading me somewhere. I froze at the edge of the creek. The ice was thin in places, jagged and brittle. My breath steamed in the frigid air as I considered my options. Turn back? Impossible. The footprints were everywhere. Move forward? Risk falling through? My heart hammered so loudly I thought the shadow would hear it. Then I saw it. The footprints stopped at the edge of the creek, but beyond the ice, deeper into the forest, a new trail appeared. Perfect, undisturbed, almost beckoning. I wanted to refuse, to retreat, but something primal compelled me forward. Every step I took, the shadow mirrored, keeping pace just beyond my peripheral vision. The forest around me felt alive, branches swaying though no wind blew, snow shifting unnaturally under unseen weight. And then I heard it, a low, gurgling whisper from beneath the ice, promising warmth, safety, a place to rest. My stomach churned. I knew better. Yet despite every instinct screaming to stop, I stepped onto the frozen creek, the ice groaning ominously beneath me. The ice groaned under my weight, each step sounding louder than the last. I could feel the shadow close behind me, though I dared not turn. The new trail stretched ahead, flawless, untouched, lined by snow-laden pines that seemed to bend slightly inward, funneling me forward. Suddenly, the ice beneath my left foot cracked sharply, splintering like glass. My heart leapt, and I stumbled forward, catching myself just in time. The shadow paused, tilting its head as if amused. I could hear the whispers again, faint and serpentine, seeping from the forest, the ice, the very air around me. Almost. I forced myself to keep moving, each step slower than the last, conscious of every fragile creak beneath my boots. The trail ended at a small clearing, snow-packed unnaturally smooth, glowing faintly under the pale winter moonlight. And there, in the center, was a figure hunched low, its form indistinct but impossibly tall. Waiting, I stopped at the edge of the clearing, frozen not by cold, but by sheer terror. The figure didn't move, yet its presence filled the space like a tangible weight. I wanted to turn and run, but instinct screamed that leaving wasn't an option. The shadow that had been trailing me paused just beyond the clearing, perfectly still, as if waiting for permission. The whispers rose again, now urgent, almost pleading, echoing through the pines and across the ice. Step forward, step forward. My boots sank slightly into the packed snow, leaving fresh impressions that seemed to stretch unnaturally behind me, leading toward the figure. Something about its posture, hunched yet deliberate, felt like patience incarnate. I could sense it studying me, measuring me, deciding if I was worthy. I swallowed hard, my fingers numb around the straps of my pack. And then the clearing changed. Shadows stretched, folding into shapes that weren't there before. Trees twisted, their bark forming faint humanoid faces that stared, mouths moving without sound. I realized the forest itself had joined the hunt. I forced myself to step forward, every movement deliberate, every breath loud in the cold stillness. The figure remained motionless, yet I could feel it shift, tilting slightly to observe me as I approached. The snow around the clearing seemed almost alive, faint ripples radiating outward with each of my steps. The whispers layered on themselves, now chanting my name rhythmically, synchronized with the subtle creak of the forest. I glanced at the ice behind me. The trail I had followed had disappeared, leaving only smooth, untouched snow, erasing any evidence that I had ever been guided here. The figure's shape became clearer. Tall, pale, impossibly thin, with long limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its face remained obscured, a smooth, featureless void that reflected the faint moonlight. The wind shifted, carrying the whispers directly into my mind, pressing secrets, fears, and regrets into my skull. I realized the figure was not threatening. It was teaching, and I had to survive the lesson. I spent what felt like hours circling the clearing, moving carefully, testing the snow, listening to the whispers. Each time I paused, the figure shifted, a subtle tilt, almost imperceptible, studying me, weighing me. My hands shook. My breath formed thick clouds in the icy air. I realized that the shadow that had followed me was no longer behind me. It had merged with the figure in the clearing, and together they dominated the space like an apex predator observing prey. The whispers began recounting moments from my life I had long buried, calling out regrets, mistakes, and fears. Every word carved icy hollows into my chest. Yet with each revelation, I understood that survival depended on acknowledgement, acknowledging the forest, the shadows, and the lesson they carried. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, deliberately placing one foot in front of the other. The clearing seemed to expand, giving me space, yet the weight of unseen eyes never lifted. I understood then. This wasn't just a trail. It was a test. Finally, I reached the center of the clearing. The figure remained motionless, but the whispers softened, almost approving, echoing faintly through the pines. The snow around me shimmered under the pale moonlight, smooth and unbroken. I knew this was the end of the trial. The shadow receded slightly, folding back into the trees, and the whispers faded into silence. I felt a strange calm wash over me, even as the cold bit into my fingers and toes. The trail leading here had vanished, erased as if it had never existed, leaving only my footprints in the snow. I walked back slowly, carefully, retracing my path, though everything looked subtly altered. The forest seemed normal again, yet I knew it had changed me. Years later, whenever I walk in the snow, I hear faint whispers beneath the crunch of ice, reminding me that the frozen trail is always watching, and I will never walk it again. My name is Clara Benson, and this happened the winter I thought a remote lodge in the Appalachian Mountains would be the perfect escape from city life. I arrived just as a heavy snowstorm rolled in, blanketing the forest in thick, wet white. The lodge sat perched on a ridge, isolated, accessible only by a narrow, winding road that disappeared into the drifts. The locals had given me warnings about storms, about staying inside, but I laughed them off. I thought solitude would be peaceful. The first night was uneventful. The wind howled, but the fire roared, and the lodge felt cozy. By the second night, however, the storm intensified, and an unease crept in. I began to notice subtle sounds. Footsteps in the hallway when I was alone, soft murmurs echoing off the wooden walls, and fleeting shadows moving behind frosted windows. Then I saw it. A figure outside, just beyond the snow-laden pines, watching, unmoving. Its presence was subtle yet commanding, making me realize that the lodge's isolation was not my friend. It was a trap. I tried to dismiss the figure as a trick of the storm, a shadow of a tree, or snow blowing in odd shapes. Yet every time I looked, it seemed closer, observing from between the trees, patient and silent. The snow around the lodge was untouched, no footprints, no evidence of travel. Yet I could feel its gaze. Inside, the lodge grew strangely alive. Doors that had been closed the night before now stood ajar, creaking on their hinges. The fire sputtered despite no drafts, and the air became thick, almost suffocating. I could hear faint whispering from the walls, repeating fragments of my thoughts, my fears, my name. Panic rose as I realized that leaving the lodge wasn't simple. The snowstorm had transformed the ridge into a white prison, and the figure outside didn't need to move. It could control the isolation, the storm, the very environment around me. I understood then that I wasn't just trapped in the lodge. I was trapped in its attention. By the third night, the storm had grown relentless. Snow piled against the lodge walls, the wind howling like a living thing. I stayed close to the fireplace, every shadow making me flinch. The figure outside had not moved, but was always there. A pale silhouette in the blizzard, perfectly still, watching. The whispering returned, louder this time, threading through the timber beams, echoing in corners, repeating my fears. Alone, trapped, afraid. I clutched a kitchen knife, though I knew it wouldn't protect me. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind felt deliberate, like the lodge itself was aware of my presence, feeding my terror. I ventured briefly to the window. The snow outside seemed distorted, bending around the figure, almost alive. Its faceless head tilted slightly, observing me with an intensity I could feel deep in my chest. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The lodge was no longer a refuge, it was a stage, and I was its unwilling performer. I tried to distract myself, keeping busy with chores, cleaning, and organizing. But the lodge resisted normalcy. Objects moved subtly when I wasn't looking. A mug shifted, a chair tilted, footprints appearing in the snow outside despite the blizzard. The whispers became more coherent, whispering memories, half-formed threats, things only I would know. Then came the sound that made me freeze, a slow, deliberate knock on the lodge door. Not multiple knocks, but one heavy, hollow thump, vibrating through the floor. My heart skipped. I knew no one could have reached me through the storm. I gripped the knife, forced myself toward the door, but every instinct screamed to stay back. I peeked through the frosted glass. The figure remained, now unmistakably humanoid, impossibly tall, limbs bending unnaturally. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its attention alone made the storm feel heavier, the snow denser, the lodge itself tighter around me. I understood then. Leaving the lodge wouldn't matter. Not unless it allowed me. I decided I had to face it. There was no leaving otherwise. I wrapped myself in my heaviest coat and grabbed a lantern. The snowstorm lashed against my face as I stepped outside, every gust of wind pushing against me like a physical barrier. The figure waited, motionless, just beyond the tree line. The air between us seemed solid, charged with a presence I couldn't comprehend. With each step toward it, the snow beneath my boots compressed unnaturally, almost vibrating with energy. I could hear whispers carried on the wind, a chorus of voices repeating my name, warning me, tempting me, mocking me. My hands trembled so badly, I struggled to keep the lantern upright. Then it moved, slowly, almost casually, sliding across the snow without leaving a mark. I froze in terror. My mind screamed to run, but every instinct told me that running would be pointless. This wasn't a creature chasing me, it was guiding me towards something, and I had no choice but to follow. I followed the figure deeper into the forest, each step slower than the last, weighted by fear and fatigue. The snow seemed to shift beneath my feet, forming subtle ridges and depressions guiding me forward. The whispers had grown insistent, urging me onward, recounting my failures, my regrets, every insecurity I had ever buried. Eventually, the figure stopped in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines whose branches bent unnaturally toward the center. The snow was perfect, untouched, except for my own footprints. I realized the figure wasn't dangerous. It was testing me, challenging me, forcing me to confront every fear I had ignored. I stared at it, frozen by its silent authority. Its faceless head tilted slightly, observing me with impossible patience. Then, without warning, the wind ceased. The snow stilled. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. In that quiet, I understood the truth. I had been chosen, not to harm, but to witness. I stayed at the edge of the clearing, barely breathing. The figure remained still, a looming presence that seemed to pull the night around it, compressing the space, making every tree, every shadow sharper, more threatening. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest, almost physical. I tried to speak, to ask questions, but no words would form. The snow at my feet shifted slightly, forming subtle ridges pointing toward the center of the clearing. The figure didn't move, yet the pressure in the air suggested it was aware of every thought, every heartbeat. My chest tightened as realization set in. This entity wasn't here to harm me. It was here to teach me, to show me something I could not understand while sheltered inside the lodge. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, then another, feeling the snow compress under my boots as though guiding me. The figure observed, patient and silent, as if measuring my resolve. I knew I had reached the true test of the snowbound lodge. With each step I took, the forest seemed to breathe around me. The pines shifted imperceptibly, branches brushing against one another in ghostly whispers. My lantern flickered, shadows dancing wildly. But the figure remained utterly still, watching, evaluating. I felt as though the clearing itself had become a living entity, part of the lesson I had to endure. The snow beneath me groaned faintly, echoing like distant whispers, as though the forest itself was speaking, reminding me of every choice I had made, every fear I had buried. The figure's presence was overwhelming, yet I felt no aggression. It was guiding me, showing me my own fragility in the face of something beyond comprehension. I stopped in the center of the clearing, heart hammering, breath ragged. The figure's head tilted slightly. For the first time, I felt a connection. Not friendship, not trust, but understanding. The snow and wind stilled, leaving only me, the figure, and the haunting silence of the mountains. I stood frozen in the clearing, my chest tight with fear and awe. The figure remained still, yet I could feel its attention pressing down, weighing my every thought. The snow around me was immaculate, untouched except for my footprints, which seemed to glow faintly under the pale moonlight. I realized that the snowbound lodge had not been haunted. It had been a threshold, a trial to confront my own fears and solitude. The whispers returned, soft this time, threading through the pines, echoing around the clearing. You came. You faced it. You endure. I understood that my survival didn't rely on fleeing, but on acknowledgement, acknowledging the storm, the isolation, the silent figure, and most of all, myself. With careful steps, I began walking back toward the lodge. The figure remained in the center, patient and unyielding, as if silently granting me permission to leave. I knew the mountains, the storm, and the snow would remember this night. But I had survived. I returned to the lodge as dawn approached, exhausted, trembling, but alive. The storm had begun to wane, the snow softening under the first weak sunlight. Inside, everything appeared normal, yet I felt the lodge had changed. It wasn't a building anymore. It was a sentient space, a witness to my endurance and fear. I packed my things in silence, glancing out at the clearing one last time. The figure was gone, leaving only a faint depression in the snow, a reminder that it had been real, that it had watched, judged, and endured alongside me. I stepped onto the snow-covered road, feeling the weight of the mountains around me, the memory of whispers pressing lightly against my mind. Years later, I still hear the soft hum of wind through pines and the distant echo of my name in snowfall. The snowbound lodge waits for those who dare seek it, and I will never return. My name is Logan Hayes, and this happened the winter I decided to explore an abandoned cabin deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I'd heard rumors from locals, stories about hikers who entered the forest and never returned. But curiosity overpowered caution. The forest was a frozen labyrinth. Snow covered the trails, erasing every landmark, and the wind cut like knives across my face. After hours of trudging through waist-deep drifts, I spotted the cabin. It was small, weathered, and partially hidden behind twisted pines, with smoke curling from the chimney. Impossible, since the place had been abandoned for decades. Despite my unease, I approached, rationalizing that someone else must be inside. The door creaked open with a soft push, and I stepped into the musty interior. The air was thick and cold, smelling of decayed wood and something metallic. Almost immediately, I felt the forest watching through the frost-covered windows. I should have left then, but something compelled me to stay. Inside, the cabin seemed larger than it should have been, its rooms extending into shadowy corners that defied logic. I could hear faint creaking as if the floorboards were alive, adjusting to my movements. A chill ran down my spine, and I realized I wasn't alone. I noticed markings on the walls, symbols etched into the wood, partially covered by frost. They seemed ancient, almost ritualistic, their meaning lost to time. Whispers echoed from the corners, soft at first, growing louder, repeating words I didn't understand, but somehow felt in my bones. Suddenly, the cabin felt unstable, like it was floating on the snow outside. I approached the window and gasped. The forest beyond was shifting, rearranging itself. Trees moved subtly, the snow flowing like water, trails vanishing as I looked at them. And then I noticed the door. It was no longer where I had entered. The cabin had changed, and I realized I might never leave the same way I came in. I moved cautiously through the cabin, each step echoing unnaturally, as if the space itself were amplifying my presence. The shadows shifted along the walls, stretching toward me, almost reaching. The air grew colder, sharper, filling my lungs with a biting chill. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the door remained missing, replaced by a wall of frost and shadows. I explored further, finding a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The whispers followed, now louder, layering over one another in a strange rhythm that made my chest tighten. Each step down creaked, resonating in a space that felt far larger than the cabin should allow. My lantern flickered, throwing grotesque shadows on the walls, twisting the etched symbols into writhing forms that seemed almost alive. At the bottom, a long hallway stretched into blackness. I could feel eyes on me, not human, watching every move. The cabin had become a maze, impossible and sentient, and I understood then that it had chosen me as its next witness, or victim. I crept down the hallway, my lantern barely illuminating the space ahead. The air smelled of wet earth, rot, and something metallic that made my stomach churn. The whispers had grown into a chorus, chanting unintelligible words that resonated directly in my mind. I stumbled upon a small door, slightly ajar, frost clinging to its edges. I pushed it open and gasped. The room inside was impossibly vast, stretching beyond the walls of the cabin, filled with hundreds of frozen footprints that seemed to move when I blinked. Shadows flitted along the corners, forming vague humanoid shapes, watching, waiting. I realized these weren't past hikers. They were echoes, trapped fragments of anyone who had entered before me. Panic surged, and I spun around to leave. The hallway behind me had vanished, replaced by endless black walls. The cabin wasn't just a building, it was alive, hungry, and I had stepped fully into its maw. I forced myself to move forward, each step hesitant, my lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming fragmented words I could almost understand. Stay, see, become. My heart pounded, my breath forming icy clouds in the stagnant air. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the hallway twisted impossibly, leaving me with no choice. The room ahead glimmered faintly, snow and frost covering the floor, shimmering under my lantern's light. A figure emerged from the darkness, a pale, thin humanoid, featureless, its limbs bending in unnatural angles. It didn't move toward me, but simply watched, head tilting slightly as though measuring my resolve. The air vibrated with its presence, making the walls feel like they were pressing inward. I realized the cabin was not only alive, it was testing me, observing my fear, my hesitation, and my will to endure. Survival depended not on strength, but on perception, and I knew I had to understand it before it understood me. I edged closer to the figure, every step a battle between terror and curiosity. The air was heavy, almost viscous, pressing against my chest, yet I couldn't stop. The whispers became a low, rhythmic chant, echoing through the walls, the floor, and my mind, recounting memories I had buried long ago. My mistakes, regrets, and fears were laid bare, amplified by the cabin's presence. The figure didn't speak, yet its attention was deafening. I understood that it was not malevolent, at least not in the human sense. It was a sentinel, a guardian of the cabin's secrets, testing those who entered. I felt the floor beneath me shift subtly, guiding me forward, urging me to witness something beyond comprehension. I reached the end of the hall, where the walls opened into a vast expanse of whiteness, snow stretching endlessly. The whispers faded, leaving only the figure, the snow, and me, alone, exposed, and profoundly aware that I had crossed into something not entirely of this world. I hesitated at the edge of the endless snow expanse, my lantern flickering and my breath ragged. The figure remained still, faceless, yet I felt it piercing into me, seeing every thought, every fear I had tried to hide. The whispers had stopped entirely, leaving only a profound silence that pressed against my mind like a physical weight. I stepped forward cautiously, the snow crunching softly beneath my boots. With every step, the expanse seemed to ripple, subtly shifting, as if alive. The cabin itself felt impossibly distant now, its walls and roof no longer containing me. The figure's presence alone guided me, silently measuring my courage, my understanding, my willingness to accept what I had stumbled into. Time felt suspended. The cold pressed into my bones, yet I continued forward, compelled by a mixture of dread and fascination. I realized then that the vanishing cabin wasn't a trap. It was a mirror, reflecting the depths of human fear back at anyone who dared to enter. I walked further into the expanse, each step heavier than the last. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, elongated and bending unnaturally. But the figure did not move. Its stillness was more terrifying than any attack. It suggested patience beyond comprehension, a timeless watcher of all who entered the cabin. The whispers returned, faint but insistent, this time echoing fragments of my own thoughts. Curious, fearful, alone. They weren't threats, they were observations, a catalog of everything I had been and everything I had feared becoming. My lantern flickered violently, throwing grotesque, dancing shadows across the endless snow. But the figure remained unwavering, unmoved, I realized the cabin had brought me here not to harm me, but to test me, to force me to confront isolation, fear, and the vast unknown. I felt my heart rate slow, my mind sharpen. Survival now depended on understanding, on acknowledging the strange, sentient space I had entered. I reached a point where the snow seemed to glow faintly beneath my lantern, pale and otherworldly. The faceless figure remained, unmoving, observing me with a weight I could feel pressing on my chest. The whispers had become a soft hum, echoing in my mind, reciting memories I hadn't thought of in years. I realized then that the cabin had not just tested me, it had examined me, dissecting my fears and vulnerabilities with precision. I tried to speak, to ask the figure why it existed, why the cabin had chosen me, but no words came. Instead, the air shifted, snow swirling in patterns that formed fleeting images. The past hikers who had vanished, frozen in place, watching, waiting. A strange understanding settled over me. I wasn't meant to escape the cabin. I was meant to witness it, to acknowledge its existence and its power. With that realization, a faint path formed in the snow, guiding me back. The figure did not follow. It simply watched, patient and eternal. I returned to the cabin entrance as dawn broke, the snowstorm finally waning. The forest outside was quiet, untouched, the snow pristine except for my own faint trail. The cabin seemed smaller now, less ominous, almost normal. I realized that the vanishing cabin had allowed me to leave, but it had left its mark on me. I would never see the world the same way again. I glanced back once more. The faceless figure was gone, leaving only a subtle depression in the snow. A reminder that it had been there, patient and eternal. I stepped onto the path leading back to civilization, the mountains looming around me, silent witnesses to the ordeal. Even years later, I still feel the presence of the cabin when the wind whistles through the trees or the snow drifts silently across a clearing. It waits for those who dare enter, testing, observing, and never forgetting. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during a solo winter hike in the Appalachian wilderness. I had always loved the mountains, especially in winter. The quiet, the isolation, the way snow muted every sound. That day, I decided to take an unmarked trail I had never explored, hoping for solitude and untouched scenery. The forest was a frozen labyrinth, snow crunching under my boots with every step. The trees were weighed down by thick layers of frost, their branches creating eerie silhouettes against the gray sky. Hours passed, and the trail became difficult to follow. The deeper I went, the more I felt a presence, something just beyond sight. I tried to dismiss it as nerves, but the shadows moved unnaturally, and the wind carried whispers I couldn't place. Suddenly, I realized I had walked in a perfect circle. The same twisted oak and jagged boulder I had passed an hour ago now loomed before me. Panic set in. The forest had become unfamiliar and hostile, and I was utterly alone. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail seemed to vanish under fresh snowfall, leaving no markers, no signs of where I had come from. The whispers grew louder, carried on the icy wind, forming syllables I couldn't comprehend, yet felt intimately familiar. My breath came in ragged clouds as panic clawed at my mind. Suddenly, I spotted a faint light through the trees. Relief surged. Someone must be nearby. I moved toward it, breaking through thick underbrush and snow-laden branches. The closer I got, the colder the air became, biting through my coat like needles. When I finally reached the clearing, there was no cabin, no campfire, nothing but a frozen pond reflecting the dim winter sky. The light I had seen flickered briefly on the snow, then disappeared entirely, leaving me in complete darkness. Something stirred just beyond the edge of the pond, watching me, patient and silent. And I realized I was no longer alone. I froze, my heart hammering, as the shadow shifted at the edge of the pond. It wasn't human. Tall, thin, and distorted, its limbs bent at impossible angles. I wanted to run, but my boots were frozen to the snow, and the wind seemed to push against me like a solid wall. The whispers returned, sharper this time, circling my mind. You shouldn't be here. Alone. Lost. I forced myself to take a step back, but the snow seemed to swallow my footprints, erasing any path I could follow. Panic set in fully. I realized I had no idea how to escape. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze following my every motion, measuring my fear, testing my resolve. I took a shaky breath, trying to calm my thoughts, and noticed faint markings on the frozen pond, scratches in the ice that hadn't been there before, forming a pattern, almost a message. I knew instinctively I had stumbled into something ancient, something that did not belong in the world of men. Desperation clawed at me, and I scrambled toward the trees, hoping to escape the pond's unnatural pull. The shadows twisted around me, branches bending and scraping, snow swirling unnaturally, as though alive. The whispers became voices, faintly repeating fragments of my own thoughts and fears, mocking me, pushing me further into panic. I stumbled onto a narrow trail that seemed slightly familiar, my lantern shaking violently. The figure had not moved, yet I could sense it everywhere, present in the air, in the snow, in the shadows. Every instinct screamed that I should leave. But where was out? The trail looped impossibly, twisting back on itself, leading me to the same pond again. I realized then that the trail, the forest, and the pond were connected. A living maze designed to trap, observe, and test anyone foolish enough to wander alone. My fear intensified, but somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance pushed me onward. I had to survive. I forced myself to keep moving, boots sinking into the deep snow, every step exhausting. The whispers persisted, now a constant murmur, pressing against my thoughts, dredging up fears I had buried long ago. I felt the forest shifting around me, trees bending subtly, snow drifting in unnatural currents, and shadows stretching toward me like long fingers. Ahead, I glimpsed a faint light, a cabin perhaps, or a fire. But as I moved closer, it seemed to vanish, swallowed by the forest. Panic surged again, but I forced myself to focus. Survival meant observation, not flight. The figure remained at the pond, still, silent, but I felt its presence tracking me as if the forest itself had become its limbs. Suddenly, I noticed the ice markings on the pond glowing faintly, forming a path leading deeper into the trees. With a deep breath, I realized the only way forward was into the unknown, guided by the forest, the whispers, and the figure watching silently from afar. I stepped onto the glowing path, the snow crunching under my boots, feeling the forest pulse around me. The air was thick, cold, and almost alive, pressing against my skin and lungs. I glanced back at the pond. The figure hadn't moved, but its presence was tangible, like a weight pressing on my mind. The whispers followed me along the path, but now they were almost gentle, urging me forward. The trees opened slightly, revealing glimpses of distant mountains and snow-draped ridges I didn't recognize. I realized the path was leading me out, yet at every turn, the forest tested me. Shadows leapt in peripheral vision, strange shapes skittered across the snow, and the ice markings on the path pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Despite my fear, I pressed on. Something inside me, a mixture of dread and determination, refused to let me succumb to panic. I understood that the forest, the pond, and the figure were connected, all part of the same test, and I had to endure it fully if I wanted to survive. The path began to twist unnaturally, curving back on itself in ways that defied logic. Each turn brought me face to face with ghostly shadows, the forest bending subtly to create illusions of movement. The whispers had grown into a rhythm, almost like a heartbeat, resonating through the trees and underfoot in the snow. I realized my sense of time was gone. The day had become night, night had become endless, and the forest seemed eternal. Ahead, the faint glow of the ice markings pulsed more intensely, guiding me toward the unknown. I could feel the figure at the pond watching me, patient, silent, a sentinel of this strange, frozen maze. The snow around me shimmered with an unnatural sheen, reflecting shapes that disappeared when I blinked. Every step was a test of courage, a trial against fear itself. The forest wasn't just alive, it was aware, conscious, and it had singled me out to witness its mysteries. I gritted my teeth and continued forward, every sense on high alert, knowing the trial was far from over. The path led me to a frozen cliffside overlooking a valley blanketed in snow. The wind howled through jagged pines, carrying whispers that now felt personal, as if recounting my deepest fears aloud. The faceless figure at the pond was gone, yet I felt its attention on me, stretching across the forest, a constant, unseen presence. I carefully made my way down the icy incline, boots slipping over the treacherous snow. Each step seemed guided by the faint glow beneath the snow, the ice markings pulsating like a heartbeat, telling me where to go and where to avoid. Shadows darted along the cliff's edge, disappearing when I turned my head. I realized the forest had created a living maze, blending reality with illusion, testing not just my courage, but my perception. At the bottom of the cliff, the glow intensified, revealing a small clearing where the snow was untouched, pristine. I understood then that the path had led me here intentionally, to prepare me for what I would see next. I stepped into the clearing, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The glow beneath the snow intensified, forming patterns that resembled faces frozen in torment. I could hear faint whispers again, but now they were different. Personal, intimate, recounting moments from my life I had long tried to forget. Fear and awe gripped me simultaneously. I realized I had stumbled into something older than memory, something that observed humanity in its rawest form. The shadows shifted at the edge of the clearing, forming vague humanoid shapes, flickering in and out like echoes. I sensed the figure at the pond still watching, patient and eternal, as if recording my every movement. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible maze I had endured, the forest that had bent reality itself. The ice markings pulsed one final time, forming a faint path out of the clearing, guiding me toward freedom, or at least what I hoped was freedom. With trembling legs, I followed the path, uncertain if I would ever see the world beyond the forest again. The path eventually led me back to a familiar trail, snow undisturbed, quiet, and seemingly ordinary. The glow vanished, the whispers faded, and the shadows retreated into the forest. I glanced back at the clearing. The ice markings were gone, the humanoid shapes vanished, and the forest appeared calm, almost welcoming. Yet I knew better. The Appalachian wilderness had shown me a truth I could not unsee, that some paths are alive, that the forest watches, remembers, and tests those who wander too far. I emerged from the trees, my body exhausted, my mind forever changed. The faceless figure and the glowing ice markings had vanished, but their presence lingered in my thoughts, in every snow-drifted clearing, in every shadow cast by the pines. I left the forest that day, carrying the knowledge that the wilderness is not empty. It waits, patient and eternal, for anyone daring enough to follow the frozen trail.